We demanded that the United States should not seek its own security at the expense of others, let alone harming the legitimate security and interests of other countries under the excuse of security threat.
The Chinese Foreign Minister there, Wang Yi, expressing China's concerns over the deployment of the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea. Welcome back. China is calling on the US to halt plans to bring a major missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. An advanced missile system commonly called THAAD is heading to South Korea to counter threats from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Neighboring China opposes the system because the advanced missile defense can reach into its territory. Russia is also opposed to the deployment of the system. Well, joining our panel now for this part of the program, Dmitry Babich is a Russian journalist with Sputnik International and a political analyst. Still with us from Beijing, Yong Chu is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, and Douglas Paul is vice president of studies for the Carnegie Endowment for International. So, Dmitry, what are Russia's specific concerns over the deployment of THAAD in South Korea?
Well, I think it's not just Russia's concern. When the Chinese Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, visited Moscow several months ago, he and his Russian colleague, Sergei Lavrov, saw eye to eye on the problem of the THAAD's deployment in South Korea. I mean, if you look at the Russian territory, you have now 3 areas where the United States is placing its so-called anti-ballistic missile system right next to the Russian border. There is one in Romania and Poland, there is another on Alaska, and now there's going to be a 3rd one next to our far eastern border in South Korea. Of course, Russia is concerned. You know, all the words about the defensive nature of these systems are simply ludicrous, because every person with the beginnings of military knowledge knows that the most painful strikes are made from behind the so-called shields, in this case missile shields. So Russia is concerned because you see a very clear strategy here. You see the United States using their allies to deploy arms and so-called shields around the Russian territory. In Poland, where you have a very radical defense minister, Antoni Macierewicz, he did not hide it. Just yesterday he said that he was, I hope, very happy that NATO, with all of its gigantic might, is turning against Russia. End of quote. Mr. Macierewicz was not scolded by the United States for making that statement, so it's quite clear that we have the same pattern here. We have anti-Russian military groups forming themselves in Eastern Europe, on Alaska, and now we have a powerful military group with anti-missile system in South Korea.
Yong Chu, what are the major Chinese concerns over the deployment of the system, beyond the fact that, of course, it can cover large parts of China as well?
Well, basically 2 points about the concerns. Number one, you mentioned cover large part of the Chinese territory. Basically, 1/3 of the scope of the X-band radar can monitor roughly 1/3 of Chinese total territory, while the so-called North Korea threats that occupies only a very small part, roughly the size of North Korea is similar with the state of Virginia. So targeting at a small state like North Korea size with Virginia, use the X-band radar, the true intention is not at North Korea, but at Russia and China. And secondly, it's more important, the China concerns the following up, say the introduction of a THAAD into South Korea will be the very important step that will be followed by the expanding THAAD systems in Northeast Asia. We know U.S. has built up an anti-missile system as a wall in Europe. And now U.S. want to build up another wall in the Asia Pacific. U.S. finally will build up a global NMD into the GMD, Global Missile Defense. So that is the strategic reason concerned by China. Such a strategic consideration of the United States by THAAD and the expanding of THAAD will destabilize the strategic situation in this region. That's why China can strongly oppose that.
Douglas, as we can hear, deep suspicion on the part of both China and Russia on the deployment of THAAD. To what extent does this upset the strategic balance in that part of the world?
Well, we're a long way from upsetting the strategic balance in Northeast Asia or East Asia generally. But as I started to say in the first segment today, there's an incipient security dilemma. The democratic leader of South Korea and the democratic president of the United States must take measures to protect their people if we have the technology and capabilities to protect our people from rogue sources of missile threat. North Korea has been exponentially increasing its missile development, and the threat is growing rapidly. And so the U.S. and Korean presidents have agreed that they'll deploy THAAD in order to provide some protection for their populations against these missile threats. Now, China looks, and Russia joins China in looking at this, and they see what we think is purely defensive as purely offensive. And then they're probably going to take measures of their own, which they will view as purely defensive, and we will see as offensive. And so this is when leadership has to come in and try to exercise some control and moderation to prevent the endless escalation of security dilemma type dynamics. China made some tactical mistakes in this. They openly told the South Koreans not to do things, which in a society like South Korea means that South Koreans have no choice but to show they're not going to be dictated to by China.
Right, but are these concerns that are being expressed by China and Russia valid concerns? Because as Dmitry just pointed out, if you look at the way anti-missile systems have been deployed around Russia, I mean, this is a third frontier.
Well, I think there are 3 points to make. One is the number of missiles involved in actually defending against the small threat from North Korea or from Iran in the case of Romania and Poland are very small. And so the number of deployed interceptors will be very small, not a threat to major powers' nuclear arsenals. Secondly, China is concerned about the ability of radars to look into China, and some experts say that the Chinese are afraid the U.S. will be able to dissect what is a Chinese real missile warhead and what is a decoy, and that will give us an advantage in a standoff conflict with nuclear arms, which is hopefully not in the cards. And the third, and I think the most real concern on China's part that I can detect, is that we will integrate Korea, Japan, and China fears Taiwan somehow into an advanced anti-missile detection and launch system in Northeast Asia. And that would create a kind of serious political threat of dividing Northeast Asia, but also a military threat to China in the longer run. We've tried to have discussions on this at a technical level, but China has refused those discussions, saying this is a strategic matter and should be handled by the top leadership. And I think it'll be on the agenda for quite a long time.
Dmitry, it looks like the deployment is going ahead. How does Russia respond to it?
Well, it's up to the military people to decide what would be the appropriate response. But I just think that this is very sad what's going on. We don't need this confrontation at all. And if anyone is to blame for it, that is certainly not Russia. Don't get me wrong. The Russian leadership has no illusions about North Korea. We have had very difficult relationship even in the Soviet times because North Korea basically supported the Maoists in China. So for many years, relations were frozen. We joined the sanctions against North Korea. Together with China, Russia is making every effort to demilitarize the North Korean regime. But that doesn't mean that so-called democratic nations will be allowed to achieve complete military superiority to the point when they can attack other nations which they consider non-democratic with impunity. And that seems to be the plan of the United States and their allies, both in Eastern Europe and in Southeast Asia. If we look at the bigger picture, if we look at the 100% support of the United States for the ruling of the Hague Tribunal on the South China Sea, which is very controversial and in which the United States could play a role of an intermediary and not of a party to the conflict, all of these signals, they show that the United States want to, they want to oppose Russia and China head-on all fronts, obviously relying on smaller nations around Russia and China. And in this situation, the United States and the whole world very often become or will become hostages to the ambitions of local nationalist leaders. You know, right now, the Polish nationalist politicians who are directly accused of being undemocratic and even insane by the European Union and various international organizations. These Polish politicians, when they feel behind themselves the United States, they make all kinds of irresponsible statements about Russia. I will be terrified if the same story repeats itself with South Korea, Japan, and China. You know, if Japan feels reassured by the United States and it starts to irritate China, that may lead to some very dangerous developments.
Okay. Yang Xiu, how does China respond to this? I mean, could we see China engage in some kind of arms race here to counter the threat? Could this push China's nuclear modernization program further up its list of priorities?
Briefly, China will try to make some strategic rebalancing to balance suddenly emerged threats by THAAD by multiple options, either to strengthen our missile attacking capabilities, or build up our anti-missile system, or develop new technologies like supersonic and drones and so on. So in short, China will make all efforts to make a rebalance caused by the THAAD and anti-missile system around our neighboring area.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.